The evening air was crisp as a well-dressed man stepped out of his car in front of Le Blanc's, one of the city's most exclusive French restaurants. His polished shoes clicked against the pavement as he adjusted his navy blue tie, a small smile playing on his lips. He had every reason to be proud. After months of hard work, he just landed a contract that would change his small consulting firm forever. The restaurant's golden lights spilled onto the sidewalk, and soft classical music drifted through the partially open door. Other guests walked past him, their quiet conversations and laughter mixing with the gentle sounds of silverware and glasses clinking inside. He checked his watch, right on time for his 7:30 reservation. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over cream-colored walls and dark wooden tables draped with pristine white tablecloths. The aroma of fresh-baked bread and seared meat filled the air, making his stomach rumble softly. He'd been looking forward to this dinner all week, planning to treat himself to their famous coq au vin, and maybe even splurge on that bottle of vintage wine he'd read about in last month's food magazine. As he approached the host stand, he noticed the maitre d' greeting another couple with a warm smile and a slight bow. The man pulled out his phone, double-checking his reservation details while he waited his turn. He'd made sure to book well in advance, knowing how difficult it was to get a table at Le Blanc's, especially on a Friday night. The couple ahead of him was quickly whisked away to their table, and he stepped forward, maintaining his professional demeanor. The maitre d's smile faded slightly as their eyes met. "Good evening," the man said confidently, his voice carrying the warmth and authority of someone used to speaking in boardrooms. "I have a reservation for 7:30. The maitre d' glanced down at the reservation book, flipping through pages with exaggerated slowness. "Your name, sir?" The question came with a slight edge that seemed out of place in such an elegant establishment. The man noticed the subtle change in atmosphere, the way the maitre d's shoulders had stiffened, how their eyes wouldn't quite meet his. He'd encountered this behavior before, but tonight was meant to be special. He wasn't going to let anything spoil his celebration. "The reservation should be under my firm's name," he replied smoothly, spelling it out. The maitre d' made a show of scanning the page again, despite the name being clearly visible in the book. The man could see it even from his position at the stand. "Ah, yes," the maitre d' finally said, though their tone suggested finding the reservation was more of an inconvenience than a confirmation. "I'm afraid your table isn't quite ready yet. Would you mind waiting at the bar?" They gestured toward a dimly lit corner, far from the main dining area where other guests were being seated. The man glanced at his watch again, then at the half-empty dining room with several clearly vacant tables. He took a steady breath, maintaining his composure. This evening was too important to let initial impressions derail it. He nodded politely and turned toward the bar, already sensing this dinner might not go quite as planned. Little did the staff know, this simple dinner reservation would turn into an evening that would change not just their restaurant, but the entire city's fine dining scene forever. The man sat at the dimly lit bar, watching as time crawled by. 15 minutes turned into 30, then 45. He nursed a glass of water, observing the steady stream of guests flowing into the restaurant. Each time the door opened, he noticed a pattern that made his stomach tighten. Couples and families walked in, some with reservations, others without. Those who looked like regular fine dining patrons were seated almost immediately. The maitre d' would greet them with practiced charm, leading them to prime tables near the windows or in cozy corners. The contrast with his own experience was impossible to ignore. From his spot at the bar, he could count at least 6 empty tables, their white tablecloths pristine and place settings untouched. The bartender avoided eye contact, busying himself with polishing already gleaming glasses. A few other patrons at the bar shot curious glances his way, probably wondering why a man in such a well-tailored suit was being left to wait. His phone buzzed, a message from his team congratulating him again on landing the contract. The irony wasn't lost on him. Outside these walls, he was a respected business owner who just secured a multi-million-dollar deal. Yet here, he was being treated like an unwelcome guest. Just then, a couple walked in without a reservation. The man watched as the maitre d' brightened immediately, checking the book with newfound efficiency. "Oh, we can certainly accommodate you." The words carried clearly across the room, each syllable striking like a small hammer against his patience. The couple was led to one of the empty tables he'd been counting for the past hour. It was a particularly nice one, right by the window with a view of the city lights. The man took a slow, deliberate breath and stood up, straightening his jacket. He built his business by facing challenges head-on, and this situation would be no different. He approached the host stand again, his footsteps measured and calm. The maitre d' noticed his approach and visibly stiffened. Other diners nearby began to quiet their conversations, perhaps sensing the tension in the air. But what they didn't know was that this man had spent years turning difficult situations into opportunities for change. "Excuse me," he said, his voice steady and clear. "I couldn't help but notice that several parties who arrived after me have been seated, including some without reservations." He paused, maintaining eye contact with the maitre d', who seemed unsure how to respond to such a direct yet polite confrontation. The restaurant manager appeared, drawn by the potential conflict. He was a tall man with graying temples who carried himself with the authority of someone used to having the final word. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, though his tone suggested he'd already decided who was causing the issue. What happened next would leave everyone in the restaurant speechless, but not for the reasons they might have expected. The man reached into his jacket pocket, and the story was about to take an unexpected turn that would teach everyone present an unforgettable lesson about judgment and dignity. "Would you like me to continue with part 3? The manager stood there with his arms crossed, looking down at the well-dressed man as if he were dealing with a minor inconvenience rather than a paying customer. "Perhaps," the manager said with a thin smile, "you might be more comfortable at one of our casual dining establishments down the street." The words hung in the air like heavy smoke. Several diners nearby stopped eating, their forks frozen halfway to their mouths. A woman at a corner table covered her mouth in shock, while her companion shook his head in disapproval. But instead of getting angry or raising his voice, the man did something unexpected. He smiled. It wasn't a forced smile or an angry one. It was the kind of smile that suggested he knew something nobody else in the room did. "More comfortable," he repeated softly, reaching into his jacket pocket. "That's an interesting choice of words." He pulled out his phone and made a quick call, his voice calm and clear. "Yes, hello. This is one of your majority shareholders. I'm currently standing in your flagship restaurant, Le Blanc. Could you please pull up the ownership documents and send them to the manager's email?" "Yes, right away." The color drained from the manager's face. The maitre d' gripped the reservation book so tightly their knuckles turned white. The quiet murmur of conversation in the restaurant had completely stopped, replaced by a silence so complete you could hear the gentle clink of ice settling in water glasses. "You see," the man continued, his voice carrying easily in the quiet room, "I bought shares in this restaurant group 6 months ago. I've been visiting each location anonymously to see how they treat their guests." He paused, looking around the room. All their guests. The manager's email notification pinged loudly in the silence. His hands shook slightly as he pulled out his phone, scanning the documents that confirmed everything the man had just said. The maitre d' had backed away from the host stand, looking like they wanted to disappear into the expensive wallpaper. But what happened next surprised everyone even more. The man pulled out a chair from a nearby empty table, one of the many that had supposedly been unavailable, and sat down. "Now," he said, "instead of firing anyone, which I could do, I have a better idea." He gestured for the manager and maitre d' to sit down. After a moment's hesitation, they did, looking like schoolchildren called to the principal's office. The other diners weren't even pretending not to watch anymore. "Starting tomorrow," the man said, his voice firm but not unkind, "this restaurant will begin a new chapter. We're going to implement mandatory training for all staff about treating every guest with equal respect." And he smiled, pulling out a business card. "I'm going to personally fund a scholarship program for minority students who want to enter the hospitality industry." The manager opened and closed his mouth several times, but no words came out. A few tables away, someone started clapping. Soon, the whole restaurant joined in, the applause growing louder and louder. The man raised his hand gently, quieting the room. "Success isn't just about making money," he said, looking directly at the manager and maitre d'. "It's about creating positive change." Now, he picked up a menu. "I believe I had a reservation for dinner." The story of what happened that night at Le Blanc spread quickly through the city's restaurant scene, but it was just the beginning of a much bigger transformation. Would you like me to continue with part 4 of the story? The tension continues to build as we see the aftermath of this remarkable confrontation. The atmosphere in the restaurant had completely transformed. Where there had been tension and discomfort, now there was a buzz of excited conversation. The man sat at his table, finally enjoying the dinner he'd come for, while around him, the evening took on an almost magical quality. Other diners kept glancing his way, some smiling, others nodding in respect. A young waiter, who had been watching everything unfold from the corner, approached his table with tears in his eyes. "Sir," he said softly, "what you did tonight. I've worked here for 2 years, and I've seen so many people treated the way you were. But nobody ever had the power to change things." The man gestured for the waiter to come closer. "Change doesn't always need power," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Sometimes it just needs someone willing to stand up and do the right thing." He pulled out another business card. "Call me tomorrow. I'd like to hear your ideas about making this place better for everyone." At the bar, a group of regular customers were having an intense discussion with the manager. "We've been coming here for years," one woman said, her voice carrying across the room. "How many times did we sit quietly while others were turned away? We're part of the problem too." The manager, still shaken by the evening's events, simply nodded. His usual polished exterior had cracked, revealing something more human underneath. He kept looking over at the man's table, as if trying to gather the courage to approach again. The maitre d', meanwhile, had retreated to a quiet corner to make some phone calls. Through the windows, people could see other staff members gathered outside, sharing the story with their colleagues who were just arriving for the late shift. Some were crying, others hugging. As the man enjoyed his meal, which the kitchen had prepared with extra care, he noticed something remarkable happening around him. People from different tables began talking to each other, sharing their own stories and experiences. The invisible walls that usually separate strangers in fancy restaurants seemed to melt away. A young couple celebrating their anniversary asked if they could buy him a drink. An elderly gentleman stopped by his table to shake his hand. "I've been dining here for 30 years, he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Tonight is the first time I've felt proud to be a customer." The most touching moment came when a teenage girl, dining with her parents, approached his table. She was shaking slightly, but her voice was clear. "I want to work in restaurants when I grow up," she said. "But I was worried about how people would treat me. After seeing what you did tonight, I'm not afraid anymore." Outside, a small crowd had gathered. Word had spread quickly through social media, and people were taking photos of the restaurant, sharing the story in real time. Local news vans were beginning to arrive, sensing that something significant had happened. But the man just continued eating his dinner, savoring each bite as if this was exactly how he planned to spend his evening. When the dessert menu came, he ordered extra portions and asked that they be shared with the kitchen staff. "Everyone should have something sweet tonight," he said with a warm smile. As the evening wound down, it was clear that Le Blanc's would never be the same. But this was more than just a story about one restaurant. It was the beginning of a movement that would ripple through the entire city's dining scene. Would you like me to continue with part 5? The story takes an even more inspiring turn as we see how this single evening begins to create lasting change throughout the community. By the time the man finished his meal, something extraordinary was happening outside LeBlanc. The sidewalk was filled with people sharing the story through phone calls and social media posts. "You won't believe what just happened," they said. Someone finally stood up and made a difference. Inside, the restaurant staff had gathered in small groups, talking in hushed but excited voices. The chef, still in his white coat, emerged from the kitchen. He was a tough-looking man with 30 years of experience in fine dining, but there were tears in his eyes as he approached the man's table. "I've worked in top restaurants around the world," the chef said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I've never been as ashamed, or as proud, as I am tonight. Ashamed of what happened, but proud of how you handled it." He reached out to shake the man's hand. "My daughter wants to be a chef, but I've always worried about how this industry would treat her. Tonight, you gave me hope." Local food bloggers had already started writing about the evening. Their posts weren't just about discrimination in restaurants. They were about how one person's dignity and grace under pressure could transform an ugly moment into something beautiful. A group of business students, who had been dining at a corner table, approached with notebooks in hand. "Sir," one of them asked, "would you consider speaking at our school? We're studying business ethics, but nothing in our textbooks compares to what we witnessed tonight." The man smiled and wrote down his contact information. "Sometimes the best business lessons don't come from books," he said. "They come from treating people right and standing up for what's fair." The manager, who had spent the last hour in his office making calls, finally emerged. His face showed the weight of deep reflection. He walked slowly to the man's table, no longer carrying himself with that earlier arrogance. Instead, he looked like someone who had just received a life-changing wake-up call. "I've just spoken with our board of directors," the manager said, his voice humble. "We're not waiting until tomorrow to start making changes. Tonight, I'm announcing an open-door policy. Anyone who has ever felt unwelcome here, please come back. Your next meal is on me, personally." The young waiter who had approached earlier was now on his phone, excitedly telling someone about the new scholarship program. "Mom," he was saying, "remember how you always wanted to go to culinary school? It's not too late. Things are really going to change now." As the man prepared to leave, he noticed something remarkable. The other diners, people who had paid hundreds of dollars for an exclusive dining experience, were pitching in to help the staff clean up. Men in expensive suits were stacking chairs. Women in designer dresses were helping sort silverware. The invisible barrier between servers and customers had vanished. Outside, a street musician had started playing "What a Wonderful World" on his saxophone. The crowd that had gathered began to sway gently to the music. Some were strangers to each other just hours ago, but now they were exchanging contact information, making plans to work together for change. The man stood at the door, taking one last look at the scene he had helped create. The maitre d' rushed over with his coat, but this time with genuine respect in their eyes. "Sir," they said softly, "I'll never forget this night. Thank you for teaching us instead of punishing us. Would you like me to continue with part 6? The story develops further as we see how this single evening begins to transform not just one restaurant, but an entire community's perspective on dignity and respect. The next morning, LeBlanc's story was everywhere. Local news stations had set up their cameras outside the restaurant, where a line of people waited to share their own experiences. But something unexpected was happening. Instead of anger, there was a sense of hope in their stories. The man arrived early, carrying a stack of papers under his arm. He'd spent the night drafting plans for the scholarship program and new restaurant policies. As he walked through the door, the entire staff stopped what they were doing and broke into spontaneous applause. "Please," he said, raising his hands with a gentle smile. "Today isn't about applause. It's about action." He laid the papers on a table and invited everyone to gather round. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, making the crystal chandeliers sparkle like new beginnings. The kitchen staff, usually hidden away behind swinging doors, sat shoulder to shoulder with the servers. The manager and maitre d', who had arrived early to help set up chairs, joined the circle. Even the cleaning staff, who normally finished their work before anyone arrived, stayed to be part of this moment. Yesterday, the man began, his voice warm and clear. We saw how a single dinner reservation could expose deep problems. But today, we're going to show how those same problems can bring people together for change. He unveiled his plans. The scholarship program would start immediately, offering full tuition for culinary school to students who couldn't afford it. But it went beyond that. Each student would be paired with a mentor from the restaurant industry, creating a network of support and understanding. The restaurant's training program was being completely rebuilt. Instead of just teaching about wine pairings and proper table settings, it would now include lessons on cultural sensitivity and the importance of treating every guest with equal respect. As he spoke, more people began arriving. Other restaurant owners from across the city, having heard the story, came to learn how they could make similar changes. The young waiter from the night before brought his mother, who hadn't dared dream of a culinary career until now. A food critic from the city's biggest newspaper sat quietly in the corner, wiping tears from his eyes as he took notes. In 20 years of reviewing restaurants, he said, I've written about every kind of cuisine, but I've never written about dignity on the menu. Until today. The man then did something unexpected. He asked everyone present to share their own stories. The dishwasher spoke about years of being treated as invisible. The hostess revealed how she'd been told to profile guests based on their appearance. Each story was a thread, weaving together a tapestry of experiences that could no longer be ignored. But the most powerful moment came when the manager stood up. His voice shook as he spoke. Last night, I was the villain in this story, he admitted. Today, I want to be part of the solution. He announced that he would be giving up half his salary to contribute to the scholarship fund. Outside, the crowd had grown. Food truck owners, who had often felt looked down upon by fine dining establishments, were giving out free meals to people waiting to share their stories. A local artist had begun painting a mural on the wall opposite the restaurant, a table where everyone was welcome. The man watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. This was more than just fixing one bad experience. It was the beginning of a movement. His phone kept buzzing with messages from other restaurants wanting to join the initiative. Would you like me to continue with part 7? The story takes an even more powerful turn as we see how this movement starts creating real, lasting change in the community. 1 week after that unforgettable night, La Blance was barely recognizable, not in its appearance, but in its spirit. The same crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, but they now shone on a different kind of dining room, one where every guest truly felt like they belonged. The first scholarship recipients had been chosen. Among them was the dishwasher's daughter, who'd been secretly taking cooking classes at the community center while working 3 jobs. When she received the news, she hugged her father so tight that both of them cried. Now you'll be the chef you always dreamed of being, he whispered. The restaurant's new training program was in full swing. Instead of the usual morning meetings about wine lists and specials, the staff gathered to share experiences and learn from each other. The maitre d', who had once been the face of discrimination, was now leading sessions on how to recognize and overcome unconscious bias. I never realized how many little things we did wrong, they explained to a room full of eager learners. The way we hover near certain tables, but ignore others. The assumptions we made based on appearance. We're unlearning these habits together. The manager had transformed too. Gone was the stiff, arrogant man of that night. In his place was someone who greeted every guest personally, who knew the names of the parking attendants, who made sure even the delivery people were offered a cold drink and a moment of rest. Local schools began bringing students for field trips, not just to learn about fine dining, but to see firsthand how change happens. The man who started it all would often sit with these students, sharing not just his story, but listening to their dreams and fears. I thought fancy restaurants weren't for people like me, one young student admitted during a visit. But now I see they're for everyone who appreciates good food and respect. The kitchen had changed too. The chef, inspired by the transformation, started a weekend program where people from different backgrounds could come and share their family recipes. Soon, Leblanc's menu began featuring dishes that told stories of heritage and heart alongside its French classics. The regular customers embraced the changes. The woman who had spoken up that first night now hosted monthly dinners where she invited people who'd never been to a fine dining restaurant before. Breaking bread together, she'd say, is the first step to breaking down walls. Social media couldn't get enough of the story. Pictures of the restaurant's new initiatives flooded Instagram and Twitter. But it wasn't just about likes and shares. Real connections were being made. Other restaurants in the city began calling, asking how they could join the movement. One evening, a healthcare worker stopped by after a long shift, still in scrubs. In the old days, they might have been turned away. Instead, the staff welcomed them with the same warmth shown to guests in evening wear. When they couldn't decide what to order, the chef came out personally to make suggestions. This isn't just about food anymore, the chef explained later. It's about dignity. Every plate we serve comes with a side of respect, and that's our most important ingredient. Would you like me to continue with Part 8? We'll see how this local transformation begins to create waves of change across the entire city's restaurant scene, touching lives in ways no one could have predicted. 1 month after the incident, Le Blanc had become more than just a restaurant. It was a symbol of positive change. The story had spread far beyond the city, inspiring similar transformations across the country. News channels were running special features about how one man's dignified response to discrimination had started a nationwide conversation. The scholarship program had grown beyond anyone's expectations. What started as a single restaurant's initiative now had support from 50 other establishments. Young people who'd never dared to dream of a career in fine dining were getting opportunities they never thought possible. One morning, a famous food critic arrived unannounced. He traveled across the country to see the changes for himself. What he found moved him to tears. In the kitchen, he saw people from all walks of life working together, sharing stories and techniques. The dining room buzzed with an energy he'd never felt in his 30 years of reviewing restaurants. "I've eaten at the finest restaurants in Paris," he wrote in his review. "But I've never tasted anything as satisfying as the dignity being served at Le Blanc. Here, respect isn't just on the menu, it's in the air you breathe." The man who started it all remained humble. He still visited regularly, but now he sat at different tables each time, listening to guests share their stories. Sometimes he'd hear snippets of conversations that made him smile. A grandmother teaching her grandchildren about standing up for what's right. A young couple on their first fancy date feeling completely at ease. The old regulars had become ambassadors of change. They greet new guests, sharing the restaurant's story and making sure everyone felt welcome. The woman who'd been celebrating her anniversary that first night now hosted weekly dinners where she invited people who'd never been to a fine restaurant before. Even the building itself seemed transformed. The walls, once cold and intimidating, now held photos of the scholarship recipients, the staff's families, and messages of hope from guests. The bar where the man had waited that fateful night was now a gathering spot where people from all backgrounds shared stories over appetizers. One evening, a group of business students presented their thesis on the Le Blanc's effect. They'd studied how treating people with dignity wasn't just morally right, it was good business. The restaurant's profits had actually increased since the changes, proving that inclusion and success could go hand in hand. The chef, who'd once run his kitchen like a military operation, had discovered a new way of leading. He started a program where home cooks from different communities could come in and teach their traditional recipes to his staff. These dishes would then appear as special features on the menu, each with a story card about its origins. Food has always been about bringing people together, the chef would say. But now, we're not just sharing meals, we're sharing dreams, hopes, and respect. The most touching moment came when a young girl celebrated her 10th birthday at the restaurant. Her parents had saved for months to bring her there. When she walked in, wearing her best dress and biggest smile, every staff member made her feel like royalty. One day, she told the chef, "I'm going to own a restaurant just like this one. Not because it's fancy, but because it makes everyone feel special." Would you like me to continue with the final part 9? We'll see how this story concludes with a powerful message about lasting change and human dignity. 6 months had passed since that unforgettable night. LeBlanc was hosting a special dinner to celebrate the changes that one evening had sparked. The dining room was filled with faces that told the story of transformation: scholarship recipients, staff members, regular customers, and first-time visitors, all sharing tables as equals. The man who started it all stood up to speak, but his voice caught with emotion as he looked around the room. The young dishwasher who was now a trainee chef. The former maitre d' who had become a passionate advocate for inclusivity. The manager who turned his mistake into a mission for change. "When I walked through these doors 6 months ago," he began, "I wasn't planning to start a movement. I just wanted to celebrate a business success. But sometimes life gives you a chance to do something bigger than yourself." He gestured to a wall where hundreds of photos hung, pictures of people who'd found their place at LeBlanc. Each image told a story. A grandmother teaching her recipes to the kitchen staff, a young student getting her scholarship acceptance, a shy couple celebrating their first fine dining experience. "This isn't just about one restaurant anymore," he continued. "It's about showing the world that real change happens when we choose dignity over anger, understanding over judgment." The evening's menu was special, a combination of traditional French cuisine and dishes contributed by staff members' families. Each plate came with a small card telling the story behind the recipe. The beef bourguignon sat proudly next to home-style cooking from around the world, each dish treated with equal respect. During dessert, a surprise guest arrived, the city's mayor, carrying an official proclamation. The date of that transformative night would now be known as Dignity in Dining Day, a yearly reminder that small acts of courage can change entire communities. But the most powerful moment came when the original kitchen staff stood together with the new scholarship students. The old guard and the new generation, side by side, showing how tradition and change could work together beautifully. "We're not just training them to be chefs," the head chef explained, his voice full of pride. "We're teaching them that they belong anywhere their dreams take them. Every kitchen, every dining room, every space in this world should be open to anyone willing to work hard and treat others with respect." As the evening wound down, guests lingered, sharing stories and dreams. The man overheard a conversation between two young workers. "You know what's amazing?" one said to the other. "It's not just that things changed, it's that everyone now believes change is possible." The restaurant had become more than just a place to eat. It was a reminder that standing up for dignity doesn't always require loud voices or angry words. Sometimes, the quietest actions create the loudest changes. Before leaving, the man stopped at the host stand, the same spot where everything had started. The new host, a scholarship recipient's parent, greeted him with a warm smile. "Welcome home," they said, and in those two words was the message of everything LeBlanc had become. A place where everyone belonged. Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars. New guests were arriving, each one walking through doors that now truly welcomed everyone. The man smiled, knowing that his story would keep inspiring others to stand up for what's right, one table at a time. The end of this story wasn't really an ending at all. It was a beginning. A reminder that change starts with one person refusing to accept injustice, choosing grace over bitterness, and showing others that dignity is the finest dish any restaurant can serve. This wasn't just about changing one restaurant's culture. It was about changing hearts, minds, and the way we treat each other. and that's a change that lasts forever. The story of LeBlanc continues to inspire others, proving that sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination isn't anger. It's showing people a better way forward.